All right, so I need a few, I would say elementary to maybe even middle school. I'd be cool with that. But you're going to have to come up here. We're going to have a little chat, okay? Anybody willing to do that? I don't need, yeah? Yeah, come on up, yeah. You got some more? You're welcome. Yeah. Fred, oh, there we go. Okay, awesome. Okay, I'm going to step down here. Okay, that's good. Okay, you guys just sit. Can you act? Yeah, why don't you sit? Yeah, you can sit there. I don't know. Like I said, I have no idea how this is going to go. So, your mouth is still full, so I don't know how that's going to work. Okay, maybe I'm going to do this. This is already different than I envisioned, so that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys a question, and we'll just see what you have to say. Okay? Yeah, that's all right. It's all good. Okay, so this is going to be the question, just for everybody. It's this, okay? What are you looking forward to about growing up? What are you looking forward to about growing up, okay? Try to keep your answers relatively short, okay? All right. You got Lainey?
Being a marine biologist.
Being a marine biologist. Okay, wow. All right.
That's my only thing.
Okay, there we go.
Being a scientist.
Wow, okay.
Playing Fortnite. Every day.
Okay, I was like, I'm pretty sure you'd play Fortnite right now, but okay, every day, that's what we're looking forward to. Okay. I know, it's hard when you get the mic in front. We can come back to you if you gotta think about it.
Maybe flying a fighter jet.
Flying a fighter jet. I think we have some extremely ambitious kids here. You guys got anything? You good? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Everybody does. Okay.
Being able to eat more.
Yes. Wow. Man. Calling out the parents there. I don't know. What's going on there, Nathan? Lindsay's in the back. What? Yeah, they're like, we feel like the need to defend ourselves. Yeah.
Everybody's gabbing because
Yep. Being able to eat. Yeah, go ahead.
What do you want to do?
Do you have something? What do you look forward to about it? It doesn't have to be what you are going to do, necessarily.
Staying up later.
Staying up later, for sure. Yeah. Okay, Michael, you got something? It's okay if you don't. It's not playing Fortnite? What's your other one? Okay, we'll come. Oh, you got one.
Being an astronaut.
Being an astronaut. Not to be outdone by the fighter jet. Okay, one more. All right, go ahead, Fred.
Telling jokes. You want to hear one?
Okay. I don't know. Yes? Okay, the people.
Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the idiot's house. Knock, knock.
Whoa.
That chicken from the other joke.
All right. Okay. All right, that was very good. Thank you very much. Let's give it up for these guys. Wow. All right. That could have gone a lot worse, right? Isn't that true? No, that was great. I appreciate that, volunteers. And I really, when I was a kid, and if someone had asked for volunteers on the stage, there's no chance I would have ever done that. So I applaud all of you guys for coming up. Okay. So what are you looking forward to when growing up? I was thinking about this question, and I'll talk a little bit more about why in a minute. But for me, I always really, really looked forward to being able to drive. So I also looked forward to eating more. I definitely looked forward to that, and in college that was demonstrated very much so. But I really looked forward to driving. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and I grew up on my bike. So I just found this from the City of Boulder website. This Boulder is like this place that is absolutely designed for bike paths. I mean, I think they spend more on their bike paths than they do on their roads. And this is, there's beautiful mountains around, and they have these wonderful bike paths. And so from early on, my mom actually let me roll around on my bike and go very far away. She didn't really have any restrictions. And I just remember like loving it. I loved being able to ride all over the city and into the mountains and all that. But it was never really quite enough, right? Like I knew that someday I really wanted to drive because I just wanted to go further, and I wanted to be able to just have the freedom to do that. And so, I don't know, I can remember pretty distinctly by about age 10 or so, I was like, man, I cannot wait until I can drive. It was like a long ways away, but I couldn't wait. But I did. The end of the story is I did learn to drive, as it turns out. This is very similar to the car that I had. It's a 1980 Toyota Corolla. It was approximately that color. It was maybe like a little bit more rusty red. It had a vinyl top, like a white vinyl top. And mine was not that shiny because pretty soon after I started driving, I had a fender bender where I pulled out and got smacked. And so the solution to that for a 1980 Toyota Corolla is you take a wrench and you pull the fender back out so the tire is no longer hitting that, and then you move on with your life. So that looks really great. That picture is a nice one. But despite the fact that I had this very, very old car, I absolutely loved driving it. It was just so great. It was like this fulfillment of this thing I'd been waiting for a long time. And I was like reflecting on that, and you got you kids here just sharing things that you hope to do when you grow up, right? Whether it's like eating more, staying up later, playing games, or a lot of you guys thinking about like what kind of profession do I want to have? And of course, there's no shortage of ambition. That is like a big goal, That's a big goal. There's a lot to do between here and there. To get from point A to point B. And, like I know for like the driving thing, right? We just kind of think back, those of you who are old enough who have gone through that. It's like, well, I mean, you have to wait and get older. I know for me, I knew that my parents were very interested in my grades being at a certain level before they were going to let me drive. So I had to work on that. I know for some of you guys, some of you teenagers, you've been thinking about like having to save money for that, right? There's all these steps along the way, and then you actually get to 15, and then you gotta actually find time and to go take the test, and you gotta go and just do one thing after another, right? You gotta get your parents to teach you or somebody to teach you, and it's just step by step by step, and then finally you gotta pass this test and all that. Right? It's like this big goal, and there's all these things that between now and then involve both kind of waiting, but then also like taking another step along the way, right? And so, last week Danielle was teaching us, and she early on recognized something about where we've been at the last few weeks, especially. We're in the series called More Than Nice, and really talking about how the Bible is asking, Jesus is inviting us to love one another in these, like all these different ways. We've actually really barely scratched the surface in the things we've talked about. But especially, I think, in the last several weeks, in the second part here, it's felt like there's this goal out there of what life could be like, what our relationships could look like, what this one anothering could look like. But like, it's kind of heavy in that it's a lot. It's like a big goal. It's a really, really big goal to have, especially as we think about like our interpersonal relationships. Like, what could those types of relationships look like? It's like a big ask, and I really appreciated how she acknowledged that. She was like, man, this feels like it's a long way. Like, I don't know how close we are to that. And so when I was praying about it this week, this teaching, actually, this is like, we have this little Google Doc that we kind of keep track of, where all the teachings are at and where we're going with things and all that. And I was looking at that this week, and I had something basically totally different for this week in the plan. And I was like, I don't think we're going to do that. I think we're going to pause a little bit. We're going to roll things back a little bit. And we're just going to ask Jesus to show us really what our next step is. What is our next step? Like, not just talking about the big picture goal and trying to imagine that, but let's just think about what our next steps are, because I think a lot of things have come up that would be good for that. So to help us do that, So we're kind of at the end of this part 2 of this series, which will continue on in the new year, of learning grace, which as I said, is a lot. So we're going to go back to Genesis, and we're going to be in chapter 39. So why don't you open there if you got your Bibles. We've been using Genesis. We've been using the story of Joseph, if you're new here. We've been using the story of Joseph, really not to preach through it necessarily, but just kind of like as a context to help us to be able to imagine what relationships and what like one anothering might look like, and kind of like as a bridge, right? Like sometimes it's easier to be able to think about how someone else did it or read a story about it and just imagine that a little bit, how they did it well or not well, right? To kind of keep ourselves in that spot. And so we're in the story of Joseph. This is a pretty famous story. He had just, in chapter 39, he had been, after being sold into slavery, he had gone to a guy, Potiphar, a powerful person in his house, and quickly became very powerful himself. He was like basically Potiphar's right-hand man. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he gets accused by Potiphar's wife of making unwanted advances when the exact opposite was the case, and he gets thrown into prison, okay? So that's where we're at here in Genesis 39. And we're just going to make some observations through the end of 39 into 40 here about Joseph and see if the Lord has some things to say to us through that, okay? So here's what it says. While Joseph was in prison, the Lord helped him and was good to him, and he even made the jailer like Joseph so much that he put him in charge of the other prisoners and everything that was done in the jail. The jailer did not worry about anything because the Lord was with Joseph and made him successful in all that he did. Okay? So this is like, I don't know, there's a lot of places in the story, since it's a familiar story. It's easy to just kind of blow right past it and, not really think too much about it. But one of the great things about Scripture, what God can do in Scripture, is He can show you something different, like every time that you read it. And there's so many different angles, so many different perspectives. And, for us, as we think about this idea of more than nice, looking at it through that lens, just looking at that, and I was like, this sounds really different than anyone else's prison experience that I've ever heard of, right? Like, I don't know very much about prison, but, I've watched a lot of prison shows and movies and stuff like that, right? And I don't think it really goes like that for the most part. What I have picked up on, my assumptions, and they're just that, but my assumption about prison is actually that relationships are probably like even more important than they are in sort of normal life, right? I mean, think about that for a second, right? Like that's why there's so many shows and dramas, is because like a lot happens in that context. You're sort of in this artificial place where everybody's trapped, right? You can't just like, you have a very limited number of choices. You cannot escape. You can try your best to get away, but you can only do that for so long. And I mean, it's like this really, really tight environment where how you end up interacting with the people around you and the choices that you make about that are pretty much going to determine just about everything about your experience, right? And so, so when we look at this, how this goes here, it says that the Lord helped him and was good to him. And so we kind of think about that, well, this is just something that God did, right? And that's true. This is a story about God and God's graciousness to Joseph. And so it is something God did. It's things that Joseph couldn't control. But one of the things I would say is that anytime we see evidence of God's grace in Scripture or in our lives, right, it's never something that just sort of happens. Your involvement, or in this case, Joseph's involvement, I would argue, is absolutely critical, right? Because when we think about God's kingdom and how God shows up for us, like one of the things that we've said around here about a year ago this time, we had a series called The Way In is the Way On for many months, and we're talking about how God's kingdom is within. It starts within us. It's something that even though God, the God of the universe, is all-powerful, He does not just impose things on you. He invites you to receive what He has. And so I think even in this case, even though God clearly has a plan, He's clearly got some really extraordinary things for Joseph, I think Joseph had to actually put himself in a place to receive that, to be able to participate with what God was doing. And I think we'll see a little bit more evidence of that as we go through the story. But yeah, I don't think this just happened. I think Joseph actually, like if you think about where he just came from, like what would your response be? Danielle kind of mentioned this a little bit. Like what would your response be, right? Like you'd already been sold into slavery, and then you kind of came, your story arc is like, and then thunk, right? And then like thunk again, right? And so when you land in prison after all that, is your response going to be, well, I'm just going to see if I can receive what the Lord has for me here, you know? That's probably not my first response. I'd be angry, I'd be bitter, I'd feel very unjustly accused, I'd feel all sorts of things. My first response probably isn't to like receive what the Lord has for me, but somehow Joseph gets there, right? And he's able to step into that. So that's interesting. Okay, so in chapter 40, while Joseph was in prison, both the king's personal servant or cupbearer and his chief cook made the king angry. So he had them thrown into the same prison with Joseph, okay? So, and I did have the Parks and Rec clip from last week in my head, because actually Lainey asked to see it too, you know? Like, so I was like, so probably the baker overcooked or undercooked. Which one? The toast? You know, it's like, you want a little burnt, but not too burnt, jail, right? So, the cupbearer, is a little too much wine or not enough wine, also jail, right? So right into jail, and he has them thrown in there. And it says they spent a long time in prison, and the official in charge of the palace guard made Joseph their servant. This is something else I hadn't noticed before. Danielle mentioned that there was like classes of prisoners. And I had kind of always read this as like, okay, they were kind of put under Joseph's charge, and in some translations it kind of makes it sound like maybe Joseph was like over them, but I think that's actually not exactly right. I think this is more correct. Like Joseph was in charge of tending to these higher class servants, higher class prisoners, I guess, right? And so Joseph is put in this position where there's some privilege behind it, but also he's having to be lower than and to serve these other prisoners that are there, okay? So then it says, one night, each of the two men had a dream, but their dreams had different meanings. And the next morning, when Joseph went to see the men, he could tell they were upset. And he asked, why are you so worried today? Why are you so worried today? So here, again, through this more than nice lens, we see something else that's interesting. He's like actually attentive and sensitive to how these two guys are doing. It's interesting, And once again, we mentioned it last week, it's like, is that where I would be? You're having to serve these higher class prisoners? Like, would you be in a position where we'd saying like, oh, I'm being sensitive to how you're doing today? I don't know about that. Okay, so then we keep going, and they tell him, we each had a dream last night, they answered. There is no one to tell us what they mean. And Joseph replies, doesn't God know the meaning of these dreams? Now tell me what you dreamed. And so different translations go at it different ways, and I picked the contemporary English version here just because it reads nicer. But that particular last verse there reads better, I think, in the NIV, and this is what it says. They say, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Okay? And I just love that statement. I really, really love that statement. I think you could maybe take that word, interpretations, okay? We could just underline that and sub it out for other things. So, fill in the blank. Do not blank, whatever it is, belong to God. Does not your relationship with this person, does not this person I need to forgive, does not this this person that I'm trying to love better, does not, whatever, right? Fill in the blank. Does it not belong to God? Okay? But then, which is great, that is absolutely something we need to understand a lot better. That belongs to God. But nevertheless, he says, tell me your dreams. Right? So he's not taking the burden of it on himself, but he is willing, again, to participate in something that he senses that God is doing. He's willing to participate. He's willing to play his part in what God is doing. So he says, tell me your dreams. And I don't know. I think that's fascinating. I also think, if you think about dreams for a second in Joseph's story, what's your relationship with dreams, Joseph? Well, I had some at the beginning of the story. You might recall them. They were pretty big, pretty grandiose. Don't remember that being received particularly well. My brothers hated me. Even my own father was like, are you, this is kind of nuts. And it ended poorly. And your relationship with dreams, if you're Joseph, is probably not very naturally very good. And yet, here he is. He's like, I could imagine him having a really good attitude towards the two guys, and then the second he's like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, well, it's about dreams. He'd be like, oh, I'm out of here, thank you, right? Like, you could have said just about anything else, and I'd be with you. But dreams, nah, I'm good. But he says, no, the interpretation, do not dreams, right? This topic, which I'm probably easily triggered by, does it not belong to God? I'm going to come with you, okay? Tell me your dreams. So they keep going. The king's personal servant told Joseph, in my dream, I saw a vine, and I decided it's not important in this particular instance to get into the dream. But in verse 12, it says, Joseph said, this is the meaning of your dream. The 3 branches stand for 3 days, and in 3 days, the king will pardon you. He will make you his personal servant again, and you will serve him wine just as you used to do. Okay, here's the key part. But when these good things happen, please don't forget to tell the king about me, so I can get out of this place. I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here in Egypt, I haven't done anything to deserve being thrown in jail. Okay, so once again, there's something in here that I was like, seems like I would just blow right past. Like, of course, if you're in prison and you've done this great favor to this guy, of course you're going to ask for this, don't forget about me, please try to get me out of here. Of course you're going to ask for that, right? That just seems totally obvious and natural. But, again, through this lens of more than nice, and we'll kind of get into some of the things that we talked about, God was like, and in light of things that he's been doing in me, and hopefully I have a chance to share some of those if I don't run out of time, I was like, what's interesting here is that he's in this relationship with this cupbearer. And what's he doing here when he talks about, hey, when these good things happen, please don't forget about me? Well, I think he's expressing a need, right? He is talking about something that he needs to someone else. And he's laying it out there. He's like, hey, I've done this thing for you, I'm serving you. But he doesn't stop there. He actually puts himself back into the equation, and he says, what would be really great is if you didn't forget about me. And, I imagine that that might have actually been either maybe difficult to say, or if not difficult to say, at the very least, his expectation with that would have been, well, maybe something along the lines of what actually happens, which is what we'll get to in a minute. Right? I doubt as he is talking to, again, this upper-class prisoner, a person that he's supposed to be serving, that as he's making this request, that he has a whole lot of faith or expectation, at least logically, that should be something that happens. But he says it anyways. Please don't forget about me with the king. So that's interesting too. And so, yeah, sure enough, at the end of the chapter, it says 3 days later, basically everything that happens, or everything that Joseph has said about both the cupbearer and the baker happens. And at the end there, it said, but the king's personal servant, the cupbearer, completely forgot about Joseph. Completely forgot about Joseph. I like how it says it in the message there. But the head cupbearer never gave Joseph another thought. He forgot all about him. And that, again, is a good translation because in the Hebrew, it does that. It says that twice, right? It does that double emphasis. He never gave Joseph another thought. He completely forgot about him, all about him, twice, just to make the point. And so that's tough. And we find out in the next chapter, which we won't go to, that it takes 2 whole years before anything else happens. Before finally, as you know in the story, that the cupbearer is able to have this remembrance and things continue on from there, okay? So all of that, kind of just slow down and kind of just walk us through that story. All of that just for the sake of really thinking about Joseph, maybe thinking about us, thinking about you, and what are the things that are kind of like right in front of us? What are kind of the one more step, the one step in front of the other that is happening, that is necessary for these bigger things to actually play out in our lives and in our relationships as we talk about what more than nice looks like? What are those things that God would have us be thinking about? And so I'm going to see how fast I can go through this. But I was thinking about what this brought me back to is a couple months ago, I was up here talking about what I call catching up about our church, okay? And it's basically an update on kind of where we're at in this season of transition in our church, if you don't know. And part of why I bring it up is just to try to broaden out the awareness, if you are not aware, that we are in a season of tremendous transition. And so I ran through these 3 slides, which all I'm going to do is just read them for the sake of awareness and to put it into context about what I'll say next. So if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, there's a YouTube video about that we can point you back to. But here are the things that I had said. I said we were founded and operated as a senior pastor-led church, and gradually David has brought in leadership, and really for the last several years, the pastoral council has been holding the authority of the church, not so much as a senior pastor-led church, but together, and that functionally we're no longer a senior pastor-led church, okay? So that's the one. I'm just going to blow through these, try not to comment. And about 3 years ago, we started this thing called LSAT to review the leadership structure, but instead of a structure, what God really put into our hearts and into our laps was this different way of doing church altogether, a different approach to how we would be doing church. And so we've been testing this operating model for a little while. We've seen God bless it. In the last couple of months, we've continued down this road. This is just kind of how we're trying to live our lives more and more as we go. I guess that was kind of a comment. Sorry. It's very hard for me. I tried. Okay. And then number 3, because pastoral council is now the church's governing body, we've been learning how to operate in this, and we've also been having help from an outside person. And it's not true that he's coming in this week, because this was in September, but he did do that, and it was great. And our job is to pursue God's will together. That's some of the language you use, to lay out the next steps for us as a church. And so that's what I said. And one of the things that I commented about that is that most of this, 70 or 80%, I think is what I said. I don't know if that's not really scientific. But one of the things I said was that most of what we're talking about here is relational. It's relational. Because when we think about what it means to pursue God's will together, what you'd have to ask is, well, what is God interested in? Right? If God has a will, what is it that he is interested in seeing? And I think for most of us, when we start the day, if you've been a Christian for more than a minute, you probably think like, well, God's will probably has to do with the decisions that we're going to make in the end. Right? What is sort of the output, the product, the final end goal, the what do you want to do with your life? What are you going to become? Like, that's kind of the focus, that God's will is about that. And it's true. God is interested about that. God is interested in the outcome. He's interested in the things that we are able to actually do, the decisions that we end up making. That is true. But it turns out that's not all he's interested in. And in fact, if we kind of think about this operating model, it's there's a lot of nuance and complexity, but I generally sort of think about it in 3 parts. And really that idea about making decisions and carrying them out is really kind of only the 3rd part. And it only actually comes after the first 2 parts. The first 2 things that God, as it turns out, is really, really interested in. And the first one of those is he's really interested in each one of us, in our individual formation and transformation He's interested in how we are able to live in his presence, to be able to be formed in his image. Like I said, the way in is the way on, right? The entire time we spent in there was really focused in on what's going on in our insides. How can we yield on the inside more and more to God's kingdom, what he wants for us, right? And so God is immensely interested in how it is that we are yielding to him. Before we're talking about a product or an outcome or a decision, what he is interested in is what is happening for us on the inside. So that's one thing. And then the middle piece is this thing called community, or we will use the phrase group formation a lot of times. So God's not just interested in our individual relationship with him and what he's doing inside of each one of us. He is also really, really interested in how we are formed together as a community. We are a people. We are God's people. And he's always been focused on that. If you look throughout Scripture, that's the narrative. He's always been looking for a people to call his own. And so, again, before, and maybe even in many cases subservient to the decisions that are made, the outcomes that happen, he's interested in how we're forming as a people, what we're doing together. So that involves a lot of things. That's what the series is really about, right? It's getting us past just this idea that we're a bunch of people that sit together in the same room once a week, who are nice to each other. But what's more? What does God have for us that's a level beyond that, right? That's a little deeper than that. And so we've had, like I said, the last few weeks, we've had a lot of things that have already been said, all along the lines of how do we love one another? How do we love one another? And a lot of them have been like, high bars. And so what I want to do is just kind of focus in again on, okay, well, what about the next step? Because God is gracious, and he never, ever asks us to just go from A to Z at all. He always just lays out one more thing in front of us and asks us, invites us into that. And so, yeah, I think I got a second. So for me, as we've been going through this stuff with the church and transition, one of the things that's become real clear for me internally is that I live most of my life trying to not appear to need anything at all. Right? I'm good at things in general, or at least I think I am, dangerously so maybe. But I try to really serve others. I try to meet other people in their needs. I try to be able to see those things and to be able to step into them. And I get great joy from that. And the Lord is often calling me to do things like that. But when it comes to actually acknowledging any sense that, well, maybe I don't have it entirely all together all the time either, and maybe I might actually have some need, I'm not that great at that, as it turns out. And I think I've had some experiences, some pretty significant experiences in the last, especially in the last few months, but over the last few years, where God has been gently showing me that internally. Okay, and so that's been a work that's been happening, and it's good. It's good. We're getting some places. Okay, but here's where it gets to more than nice, and a little bit more than just stuff that is happening internally. What God's been talking to me about in the context of all the stuff that we've been doing, and it's been a lot in pastoral council and in other spaces with other leaders as we're processing things, it's as it turns out, I might have to say that out loud. I might have to admit at certain points and say out loud in honesty, put some need out on the table. It's not just think about it, or pray about it, but actually say it out loud. And I know for some of you are I don't have that problem at all. I'm just that's fine. I get that. I get that. You just think about if you were the opposite of that, okay? Complete opposite. That's me. So that's been a challenge. That's been a challenge. I had that even this week. We were in a meeting, and I was literally trying to kind of like offload any idea that I needed something. And then all of a sudden, God like brought up like these emotions, these feelings that I had to pay attention to right away. And it was like, what's happening? And I was like, oh, you know what? This is because, and I was like actually kind of getting upset. And I was like, this is actually because you need to be seen. Like you have a need for people to be able to actually see what you're doing and to be able to support you in that, to be able to help carry the loads that you have, right? You have a need for that, and you need to say that out loud. And so I was able to do that a little bit with some friends, and now I'm saying it to all of you, okay? So that's like a step, right? That was like a next step for me. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to walk through some other potential next steps straight out of the teachings that we've had the last few weeks. And I'm just going to go through them, like I'm going to pause for about 5 seconds in between each one. And then I'll invite the worship team to come up after that, okay? And so here's all I want you to do. I want you to just pay attention when I put it up there. You'll read it, and then just notice, does that resonate with me? Like, does it feel like inside, like, oh, like that might be something God is inviting me into, okay? And one way that might feel is just absolute repulsion. Like, that's often a very good sign that that might be something that God is saying. So you're like, no, not that, okay? So, you ready? So this is from last week. Admitting you've been hurt by someone in this community, and many of these have the words "in this community" in them, and moving towards forgiveness. Pause. So might that be a next step? One more step. Okay, here's another one from the week before. Confessing sin or burdens to someone in this community. Is that for you? Next one. Professing something God's shown you to be true. Right? Professing, which is just kind of a fancier way of saying, like, actually, again, saying out loud, admitting something that's true. Maybe about you, maybe about God. Professing something God's shown you to be true. Next one, examining your motivation for speaking or not speaking to people, again, in this community. How do you decide whether you say something or not say something? Or maybe even introduce yourself or not introduce yourself, or interact with people or not? Examining your motivation for speaking or not speaking to people in this community. And then, just because we got to have a catch-all, okay? If none of those quite resonated, and I suspect that at least one of those did on some level, but asking Jesus to show you something else, okay? You can take that with you as you go, okay? So, those could be some one more steps. You don't have to do all of them. I would recommend that you not, actually. But listen to Jesus and see what he has for you.